The envelope sat on Ava's desk, unopened. Its cream-colored paper and elegant calligraphy stood out against the chaos of blueprints, sticky notes, and coffee cups that cluttered her workspace. She stared at it, her fingers hovering over the edge, as if opening it would somehow unravel the carefully constructed life she'd built over the past decade. "Ava, you're going to be late for the meeting," her assistant Mia called from the doorway. "I'll be there in a minute," Ava replied, her voice steady despite the knot forming in her stomach. She picked up the envelope and turned it over. The return address confirmed her suspicions: Sophie and Mark's wedding. Sophie, her best friend from high school, was getting married. And of course, the wedding was in their hometown, the place Ava hadn't set foot in since she left for college. She slid her finger under the flap and pulled out the invitation. The words, "We'd love for you to join us as we celebrate our love," were printed in gold ink, accompanied by a photo of Sophie and Mark beaming at the camera. Ava smiled faintly. Sophie had always been the romantic one, the one who believed in fairy tales and happily ever afters. Ava, on the other hand, had learned to be practical. Love was messy, unpredictable, and often painful. It was easier to focus on her career, where she could control the outcome. But as she stared at the invitation, a memory surfaced, one she'd buried deep. It was the summer before senior year, and she and Jake had been sitting on the hood of his beat-up car, watching the sunset. They'd talked about the future, about how they'd travel the world together, how they'd never let anything come between them. Back then, she'd believed in forever. Back then, she'd believed in him. Ava shook her head, pushing the memory aside. That was a lifetime ago. Jake was probably living his dream, playing guitar in some far-off city while she was here, building skyscrapers and avoiding anything that resembled a relationship. Still, the thought of seeing him again, if he even showed up, made her heart race. Meanwhile, in a small cafe in Paris, Jake strummed his guitar absent-mindedly. The cafe was quiet, the kind of place where he could lose himself in the music without anyone bothering him. His phone buzzed on the table, and he glanced at the screen. It was a text from Sophie. "You're coming to the wedding, right? Don't make me hunt you down." Jake chuckled. Sophie had always been persistent. He typed out a quick reply. Wouldn't miss it for the world. He set his phone down and leaned back in his chair, staring out the window. The truth was, he hadn't been back home in years. After high school, he'd left to chase his dream of becoming a musician, leaving behind everything and everyone he'd ever known, including Ava. He hadn't spoken to her since that day at the train station, when they'd said goodbye with tears in their eyes and promises they couldn't keep. He'd thought about reaching out over the years, but what would he even say? "Hey, remember me? The guy who broke your heart?" No, it was better to let the past stay in the past. But now, with the wedding looming, he couldn't help but wonder if he'd see her. Would she even want to talk to him? Or would she avoid him, the way he'd avoided her all these years? Jake sighed and picked up his guitar again, strumming a familiar melody, one he'd written for her, back when they were young and foolish enough to believe in forever. Back in her office, Ava tucked the invitation into her bag and stood up. She had a meeting to attend, a project to focus on. But as she walked down the hallway, her mind kept drifting back to the past, to Jake, to the life they'd once dreamed of, and to the question she couldn't shake. What if? The drive to Willow Creek was longer than Ava remembered. The familiar highway stretched out before her, flanked by rolling hills and fields of golden wheat. She hadn't been back in years, and the closer she got, the more her stomach churned. It wasn't just the wedding that had her on edge. It was the possibility of seeing him. She pulled into the driveway of her parents' house, the same one she'd grown up in. The white picket fence was still there, though it looked like it could use a fresh coat of paint. Her mom was waiting on the porch, a wide smile on her face. "Ava, you're here!" her mom exclaimed, rushing down the steps to hug her. "Hi, Mom," Ava said, returning the embrace. It felt good to be home, even if it was just for a few days. Inside, the house smelled like cinnamon and freshly baked bread. Her mom had clearly been busy preparing for her visit. Ava set her bag down and took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves. "So are you excited for the wedding?" her mom asked, handing her a cup of tea. "Yeah, it'll be nice to see everyone," Ava replied, though her mind was elsewhere. She couldn't stop thinking about Jake. Would he be there? Would he even want to talk to her? Meanwhile, Jake's plane touched down at the small, regional airport just outside Willow Creek. He grabbed his guitar case and duffel bag and headed for the rental car counter. The town hadn't changed much since he'd left, and as he drove through the familiar streets, he felt a mix of nostalgia and apprehension. He checked into a quaint bed and breakfast on the edge of town, the same one where the wedding party was staying. The owner, Mrs. Thompson, greeted him warmly. "Jake, it's been so long." "How are you, dear?" she asked, handing him a key. "I'm good, Mrs. Thompson. Just here for Sophie's wedding," he replied. "Oh, it's going to be lovely. And I hear Ava's in town too," Mrs. Thompson said with a knowing smile. Jake's heart skipped a beat. So Ava was here. He hadn't been sure if she'd come, but now that he knew she was in town, the reality of seeing her again hit him like a ton of bricks. That evening, Ava and Sophie met up at their favorite diner for a pre-wedding catch-up. The place hadn't changed a bit. Same red vinyl booths, same jukebox in the corner, same smell of fries and milkshakes. "I can't believe you're getting married," Ava said, sipping her coffee. "I know, right?" "It's crazy," Sophie replied, grinning. "But I'm so happy. Mark's amazing. I'm really happy for you," Ava said sincerely. She hesitated for a moment before adding, "So, who else is coming to the wedding?" Sophie raised an eyebrow. "You mean Jake?" Ava blushed. "I was just curious." "He's coming," Sophie said, her tone softening. "I talked to him the other day. He's staying at the B&B. Ava's heart raced. "Oh, Ava, it's been 10 years. Maybe it's time to let go of the past," Sophie said gently. "I have let go," Ava insisted, though she wasn't sure if she was trying to convince Sophie or herself. Later that night, Jake sat on the porch of the B&B strumming his guitar. The stars were out, and the air was cool and crisp. He couldn't stop thinking about Ava. What would he say to her? How would she react? He'd spent years running from his feelings. But now that he was back in Willow Creek, there was no escaping them. He played a few chords, the melody familiar and bittersweet. It was the song he'd written for her all those years ago, the one he'd never finished. Maybe, just maybe, he'd get the chance to play it for her again. The wedding rehearsal was held at the old chapel on the edge of town, a charming little building with stained glass windows and a steeple that reached toward the sky. Ava stood outside, clutching her bouquet of flowers, her heart pounding in her chest. She'd spent the morning trying to distract herself with errands, but now that she was here, there was no avoiding it. Jake would be inside. She took a deep breath and pushed open the heavy wooden door. The chapel was filled with the soft murmur of voices and the scent of fresh flowers. Sophie was at the altar, laughing with Mark, while the rest of the wedding party mingled in the pews. And then Ava saw him. Jake was standing near the back, his hands in his pockets, his dark hair slightly messy as if he'd just run his fingers through it. He looked the same, yet different, older, more rugged, but still unmistakably him. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment she couldn't move. As if sensing her presence, Jake turned and their eyes met. Time seemed to stand still. Ava felt a rush of emotions, nostalgia, longing, and a hint of anger she hadn't realized she'd been holding on to. Jake's expression was unreadable, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "Ava," he said, his voice low and steady. "Jake," she replied, forcing a smile. "It's been a while." "Yeah," he said, stepping closer. "Too long." There was an awkward silence as they stood there, neither of them sure what to say. Finally, Sophie broke the tension by clapping her hands.